Why did I regain weight? It's a common question, a nagging concern, and it will happen to you because it happens to everyone. Little is more frustrating than seeing the scale move in the opposite direction of what you intend, especially when you're doing everything right. To give a reason why is sometimes difficult because there's a lot more to weight gain and loss than your diet and your exercise. A person who fails to follow the plan knows immediately why the scale is not moving in their favor. But for the person who is sticking to their diet, training 2 to 3 times a week, drinking enough water, getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night, and not experiencing high degrees of stress, the reason why weight gain happens can be complex. Now, all of these things I just mentioned matter a lot. So if you are not doing well in one of these 5 categories, that can be a reason for a regain or a plateau. However, for the purpose of our discussion, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to assume that you're doing most, if not all, of these things. To understand the issue, we need to understand what our body weight is comprised of. There's the weight of your skeleton, your organs, blood, water, muscle, connective tissue, and fat. Now, of these, the 3 we're going to focus our attention on is water, muscle, and fat, because only these are influenced by our nutrition, our exercise, and lifestyle choices. The weight of the others remains unchanged once we enter adulthood. Now, a change in any one of these 3, up or down, will affect the scale. But that doesn't always tell us what's happening with our body and the changes that we're seeing. For example, it's quite common to lose fat and not see a drop on the scale. You can lose inches, have your clothes feel loose, drop a size, and yet the scale might have barely budged at all. Or you may even see an increase on the scale, yet all of these positive changes occur. So how is that possible? Well, let's talk about muscle and fat. It's important that we make this distinction between muscle and fat, or the weight that we acquire or lose from muscle or fat. Now, to give you just a quick visual example, if we were talking about a pound of fat, it might be about that size, right? So maybe about the size of a softball, maybe a little bit bigger than that. But if we were talking about a pound of muscle, well, that might be about the size of our fist or a baseball. Now, both of them are 1 pound, but one clearly takes up a lot more space than the other, does it not? And that's what happens with our body. So sometimes, especially if you are early on in your journey and maybe you're just exercising or doing resistance training for the first time ever, and you're gaining a little bit of muscle, or maybe regaining muscle that you've lost over the last decade or 2 that you haven't been exercising, well, what does happen is your body will put on muscle weight. And the cool thing about muscle weight is that, like we just mentioned, it doesn't take up a whole lot of space compared to maybe the fat that you have accumulated before then. Well, that takes up a lot more space. So what typically will happen with a lot of people early on in their fitness journey with adding exercise and doing better with their nutrition is they will see a reduction in their fat weight while experiencing an increase in their muscle weight. Now, contrary to what some people believe, this is not a significant increase in muscle weight. We don't just magically put on 10, 20 pounds of muscle overnight. So if you're thinking that the scale going up is you putting on muscle, chances are it's not. It tends to happen a little bit slower and more gradually. However, in the early phases, it can happen relatively quick just because of regaining what's been lost. Now, with that said, if you lost a pound of fat and you gained a pound of muscle, it nullifies the scale. No change in weight. However, there is a significant change in your body composition. So what you might notice is your jeans fit a little bit looser. How about that? You look better in the mirror. But then you step on the scale and nothing's changed. What happened? Well, nothing bad happened. You just swapped out a smaller but more dense pound of muscle for a larger pound of fat. That's it. So it is not uncommon for this scenario to play out just this way. And that's why I want you to not be overly concerned if initially, say through your first 4 weeks, you're not experiencing this tremendous weight loss. It's very likely that the reason why is that, well, you've regained muscle while simultaneously losing fat. But this will only be true if you are noticing the difference in how your clothing fit or your measurements or whatever it is that you use as a means of making sure that you are losing body fat. So with that said, let's talk about the third component here, water, and specifically the whoosh phenomenon. Now, between muscle, fat, and water, water is easily the most volatile. It is constantly changing depending upon how many carbs you eat, the sodium or salt you consume, your levels of hydration or dehydration, as well as natural biorhythms, and for women, their menstrual cycle. Nothing is more disruptive to the scale than water, and nothing can be more liberating than the whoosh phenomenon. Now, to understand the phenomenon, allow me to paint a picture for you. So I want you to pretend for a moment that this cup of water represents your body. And your body is made up of 70 to 75% water, just like what's in this cup right now. But also in your body are fat cells. So we're going to pretend for a moment that this sponge that's sitting in this glass of water represents your fat cells. Now, what are the fat cells filled with? You guessed it, water. So what happens when you lose body fat is simply this. We take this sponge, right? This is your fat cell, and we squeeze it and we shrink it until it's a much smaller size. So now the sponge is this big and a lot of the water from it has been released. But where did that water go? It's still in the body. It's still in the cup. And what happens in this scenario for a lot of people is that when they lose fat, they notice it in their body almost immediately. They can look in the mirror, they look a little bit different. They slip on those jeans and they feel a lot looser. But then they step on the scale and the scale has not changed. Why? Well, it's because although the fat cell itself has shrunk, the water that contained in it has not left the body yet. And this is important because many of us will utilize a scale as our means of measuring our progress. And it shouldn't be the only measure. Yes, it should be a measure, but we should also be taking account of our measurements and our pictures. The combination of those three things together is what's going to paint the full picture of what's going on. Because there will be times where you will look better. It will be obvious, but the scale's not going to reflect it. Then there's going to be times where it seems like nothing's changed, but yet you step on the scale and you're a little bit lighter. So where the whoosh phenomenon comes is this. When you step on that scale and it doesn't change, and you step on the next day and it doesn't change, and the day after that it doesn't change. If you remain diligent, doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, eventually you are going to step on that scale and suddenly, like a whoosh, you're going to see that scale drop. And why did it drop? Because that water whooshed out of your body. Now, I know that is the least scientific thing you've probably heard me spoke about in all of these modules, but it's true. Now, why exactly this happens, I don't know. That's why they call it a phenomenon. But what we have noticed is that over time, this is exactly how the scenario plays out for so many people. So instead of getting up in arms about not seeing the change on the scale, but yet seeing it in your body, following your plan really well, but it's not showing up on the scale yet. The key is this is when it's most important to remain diligent, because if you remain diligent, then you are likely going to experience the whoosh phenomenon and you're going to see a drop of 2 to 4 pounds seemingly overnight. And you didn't do anything different. You did not do anything special. It was your body finally saying, hey, there's no need for us to retain this water any longer, so let it go. And so it does. And then you see exactly what it is that you've been waiting for. So I say this to give you encouragement. I say this to help you to understand the way fat loss actually works, because rarely does it work the way we think it does or should. This is more likely what's going to transpire. And as it transpires like this, you'll notice that you are not stepping on the scale each day and seeing a drop. And the next day, another drop. And the next day, a drop. Rarely does it work like that. Never does it work like that. But what's most likely is that you'll see a drop, and then you'll see nothing. Then you'll see another drop, and then things will level out. Then you're going to see another bigger drop, and things are going to be normal for a few days or maybe even a week or two until your next big drop. And that's how the whoosh phenomenon fits into your fat loss.